Everything's fine on 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Thank you. Our biggest strategic adversary, China, its latest trade data has come out, and what we are heading towards is surprising, shocking, and concerning. That's the question we are going to explore. But before that, we need to understand that while India struggles with releasing the data, collecting the data, and analytically showing to its people what exactly is going on in India, the Chinese government is highly efficient in providing the data. In fact, Indian government is yet to provide the export-import trade data from October. We should also realize that India does a census every 10 years. The last census was done in 2011 and it was supposed to be done again in 2021. But due to COVID, it was postponed and it is 2024. That is 3 years later, or rather 3 years late, still the census has not been done. So where we are sitting as a country and how much progress and development we have made, nobody knows. It's up in the air and probably it is well known only through WhatsApp University. So back to the main topic. China's trade data reveals a major milestone. What is that? That China's trade surplus has crossed $1 trillion mark. So what it means is that this figure shows clearly China's global trade dominance. $1 trillion trade surplus means that China is exporting more and importing less by about $1 trillion mark. So let's go back into some history and we will find that China for the last time had a trade deficit only in 1993. So that's about 31 years of trade surplus and it is growing year on year. If you put it in perspective to India, India's total trade, that means if you add the exports and the imports over past 3 years, it has been altogether $1 trillion. So the net of China's trade is equal to India's entire trade. And we should also understand that India's GDP is about 3 trillion. So China has cash, China has trade surplus equivalent to 1/3 of India's entire GDP. And that is the scale which is tipping the balance seriously and severely in favor of China, especially when China is sitting on our northern borders. India does not have a friendly relationship with China. And off and on, we have skirmish with the Chinese army. In fact, over the last decade, there have been 77 hotspots of India and China in conflict, in contest of the borders. If you look at the India-China trade deficit history, you would find that the balance, of course, is in favor of China, but then it is negative for India to a tune of $100 billion. This means that India is importing 121 billion worth of goods from China and exporting only or $18 billion worth of goods to China. If you see overall, it is only 5%. And that is why China would not care for the economic might of India. Howsoever India would call as the development and its trajectory towards Viksit Bharat. But it is not going to make any difference in the way China is going to approach India. Howsoever we might say make in India, but then it is not reducing the dependency of India's import from China. And therefore, the trade deficit with China has been only widening. So if you look at the figures, when the Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiative started, in year 2018, India's import from China was $77 billion. In 2024, while we are still talking of Atmanirbhar Bharat, the import is 121 billion from China only. While India, how much ever it is making in India, the exports to China is stagnant at 18 to 19 billion dollars. So there is something very wrong that India is doing as far as its manufacturing is concerned, as far as its trade is concerned. So how did China reach to $1 trillion mark? It has been found that China is consuming less domestically while exporting more. And that shows from the numbers that China's import is declining if you see the percentage of its GDP, while its exports are rising as a ratio of its GDP. The most impacted countries are Australia, Indonesia, Thailand, and of course India. If you look deeper into this question as to why the imports into China are reducing, this means that Chinese are learning to make their own products, which earlier they were importing from the countries like Australia, Indonesia, India, and Thailand. And that only shows their commitment and their focus in Chinese Atmanirbhar. They are learning to make things and then using that knowledge to export more back into the countries. For example, China imports raw material for steel from Brazil and then it exports steel back into Brazil, which is much cheaper than what Brazil would have made its own steel. So made in Brazil steel is much more expensive than exporting Brazilian raw material to China for making steel. Earlier also, we have heard that the Chinese steel dumping has affected majorly the economy of Britain, and that is the reason why the Tata Steel's plants in Britain have been shut down. China has overtaken the United States as the largest automobile manufacturer of the world, and today they are making electric vehicles much cheaper than the Tesla. The consequences have been that the Chinese electric vehicles were flooding the European market and had the potential of actually closing down the Tesla market in Europe. As a net result, the European Union has to impose a tariff on the Chinese electric vehicles. Now that is the power of the Chinese innovation, Chinese scientific development, and their learning curve which they have gotten from the countries across the world. Today, China is producing the most of the electric vehicles, as we said. Solar panels or the components in solar panels, even the ones that are being installed in India. And they are now even into passenger jetliners. With the ongoing crisis of Boeing, soon the Chinese will be able to challenge the dominance of Airbus of Europe and the Boeing of United States. So, Made in China 2025 policy is seeing that it has surpassed the manufacturing output of United States, Japan, Germany, South Korea, and Britain all put together. And this power is going to not only tip the balance in favor of China as far as the economics and trade is concerned, but will severely affect the geopolitics also of the world. We have already seen the debt trap policy of China, which has affected many countries, and the Belt and Road Initiative is making inroads into the economics of many countries across the world. So there is a very thoughtful strategic planning which is encompassing the trade policy of China, the manufacturing policy of China, the research and development policy of China, and the overall education and the focus on export-oriented economy of China. If you remember, in few episodes earlier, we have said that one of the enemy of India is its research and development attitude. Now, this has come out very clearly in this report that Chinese research and development and its innovation is actually the friend of China and is actually making China more powerful than its neighbors, or rather the pioneers of science and technology countries like US, Canada, Britain, and Europe. Now here comes the historical perspective if you want to see the trade surplus numbers. Germany was upbeat on manufacturing and they were the factory of the world, and that is where Germany's geopolitical ambitions had hampered the peace in World War I and World War II. The same trend we are seeing with China, where it is dominating the world economics and the world trade and its global ambitions. Now, quickly, I will also talk about Trump's takeover of US presidency and the consequence on the Chinese trade tariff war with United States. So, Trump has said that he will impose a 20% trade tariff on the Chinese imports. Now, what this means is that China, in order to compensate for the 20% tariff, would weaken its own currency in order to make its goods cheaper. And the consequence of this would be that the exports to Europe will be cheaper. Exports to the global south like Thailand, Indonesia would be cheaper. And so will be the Chinese exports to India. They will be cheaper by 20%. What further this means is that the Indian industries, the Indian factories and the manufacturers who are already struggling, as the news we are seeing, they would be under pressure to reduce the cost by at least 20% to make their products cheaper and competitive with the Chinese products. And that is going to kill the Indian manufacturing industry further. So there is a domino effect if the Trump administration applies 20% tariff on the Chinese imports. There are already crises in the Thai factories. About 1,700 factories in Thailand have closed down because of the cheap Chinese goods. Indonesia has banned the Temu app that supplied Chinese cheap goods but very nice products. And if you see between year 2000 and 2012, the United States has lost 2 million jobs in industries like furniture, toys and clothes just because their manufacturing have shifted to China. Of course, that's a bad decision, but that is it. So India is in trouble. I have no qualms in saying that. And therefore, if an urgent and important economic strategy policy is not undertaken by the Modi government, then we might end up being a slave economy to China. Our industry would be struggling to stand on its own feet. Atmanirbhar Bharat would be handicapped if they do not import Chinese goods. And that would be a very dangerous situation for the national security of India, for the sovereignty of India. In a way, it is easy to say that China has already weaponized trade and the strategic domination, whether it is manufacturing or it is the Belt and Road Initiative, the BRI, or it is encircling the Indian subcontinent with ports in Pakistan, Sri Lanka, or its presence in Bangladesh and Burma. We have already spoken about the encirclement of India by the Chinese presence in our earlier episode in 2024. And this is now getting voiced very clearly through this report of Chinese global trade. At Apna Radio, we can continue to appeal to the Indian economic strategist and the Niti Aayog and the Indian Prime Minister that right now is the time to take an urgent step, not only to improve the concept of Atmanirbhar Bharat in the true sense, and it is time to change its Make in India policy to Made in India policy, like the Chinese have done as to Made in China 2025 policy. If it is not done as soon as possible, then India risks to be in danger of Chinese aggression and Chinese domination. We are already dominated by the Chinese trade, but then soon it will take its shape into a geopolitical dominance and also its dominance at our Himalayan borders. With that concern, I close today's discussion. Looking back to your feedback. See you again next week. Bye for now.
You are listening to 93.9 Dublin South FM.
Broadcasting from the Dundrum Town Centre. This is Dublin South FM.